Good morning. So today we're going to tackle chapter 8 and chapter 9. We're not going to see a lot that's new. Kohelet is repeating himself. And if you have this version of the book, you may note that there are a tremendous number of footnotes. And that's always because it's very difficult to translate or to understand precisely what it is that Kohelet is telling us. And as we've said before, it's possible that there were scribal errors that were made. Here's just one example. Sometimes the word is hevel. We've seen that word over and over and over again, hevel, which means breath, or vanity or nothingness, that all of life is hevel. It's like a breath. It's gone, right? The word hevel, sometimes maybe the original word might have been hakol, which means everything. Now, the difference between hevel and hakol, they both start with a hey, they both end with a lamed, and in the middle, you've got either a vet or a kaf, and the vet and the kaf look extremely similar. So, besides that tiny little piece at the bottom right of the vet, it could very easily be a kaf. So a scribe could have made a mistake, and we don't really know. Sometimes the translators will take it upon themselves to improve the text that they've received. They're guessing, and it might work out a little bit easier, but nobody knows for sure. And the other possibility, besides scribal errors, we've said, could also be because we're dealing with idioms that have changed meaning over the course of time. And what was understood 2,200 years ago, over the course of time, Hebrew changed, and people who read it didn't really know what was going on. So it's a difficult couple of chapters, but there's a couple of fascinating things to focus on. So let's dive right in. Chapter 8 of Kohelet. Who is like the wise man? And who knows the meaning of the adage? So it's as if he's quoting a well-known proverb from the 3rd century BCE, right? And the proverb is, quote, "A man's wisdom lights up his face so that his deep discontent is dissembled." Okay? So the question is, what does that mean? And he then comes, after quoting this proverb, he says, I know. In line 2, it starts with ani, right? Almost like raising his hand. I know what it means, and here's his interpretation of that well-known proverb. Obey the king's orders, and don't rush into uttering an oath by God. So the idea is you don't want to mess with people of authority, whether it's the king of flesh and blood or whether it's the king of the universe, right? So don't tick off somebody who has the power, if he's angry at you, to ruin your life, whether it's a king or a god. And he's ultimately telling us, the first part is be careful when you're messing with authority. And as we've said many, many times, wisdom literature is within the realm of the upper class people. Upper class, it's not geared towards the poor who didn't have time to sit around and to study and to philosophize. It was the upper class who had that leisure. And it was the upper class who also had entree into the palace and had connections to authorities and to the king. And so the message here of the teacher to the young man who's in his wisdom class is don't mess around with the palace. Don't get on the bad side of the politicians, right? Because they can ruin everything for you. And then he goes on in verse 3, leave his presence, do not tarry in a dangerous situation, for he can do anything he pleases. You don't want to hang around the king or the palace more than you need to, because you think, oh, I'm buddy-buddy with the king, now we're pals, this brings me more power. The more you hang around, the more there's a chance that you're going to get yourself in trouble. Do what you got to do and then get out, right? Good advice in terms of politics. Verse 4, inasmuch as a king's command is authoritative, and none can say to him, what are you doing? One who obeys orders will not suffer from the dangerous situation. You know, I think we would have hoped for something more ethical and moral and of a deeper conscience than do what the king says, don't question, don't draw attention to yourself. That's not ultimately what Jewish ethics would counsel us. The most famous case, I think, of all is after David commits adultery with Bathsheba, Nathan, the prophet, comes and says to David in front of everybody else, says, you know, king, there's this incredible case. There was a rich guy living near a poor guy, and the rich guy was having a guest, so he wanted to serve mutton. So what did he do? He stole the poor man's lamb. He only had one lamb, and it was a pet. And the rich guy stole the poor guy's lamb and fed it to his guest. What should we do in such a case? And of course, the king says, that's the most terrible thing I ever heard. That rich man should be killed for what he did. And Nathan steps to David, points his finger in his face in front of everybody in the court and says, Ata ha'ish, you are the man. Meaning you, King David, are the rich guy. You had flocks and flocks of, in your harem of wives. What did you do? You came and you stole the wife of Uriah the Hittite, Bathsheba. Then you had him killed. Right? So this is risking your life. But Nathan had the guts and the courage to do this. And as much as we would condemn David, we got to give him credit for not killing Nathan and for being remorseful at that moment. But Kohelet is saying, I'm not telling you the way it should be. I'm telling you the way it is. And the way it is don't mess around with people who have power, because they're going to hurt you. Do what they say and then move on. Keep your head low. A wise man, however, will bear in mind that there is a time of doom. For there is a time for every experience, including the doom. For a man's calamity overwhelms him. Indeed, he does not know what is to happen. Even when it is on the point of happening, who can tell him? If you think that the secret of life is always do the right thing and it'll work out well, Kohelet is telling us that ain't the way life works. That even if you do the right thing, you're still going to have trouble. You're still going to get, you're still going to have a piano fall on your head, or you're going to fall into a pit that's in front of you. There's always something there, and you never know, and you can't prepare for it. That's just the way life is. Accept it. Verse 8, no man has authority over the life breath, to hold back the life breath. There is no authority over the day of death. You don't control anything. Things will happen. That is life. There is no mustering out from the war. wickedness is powerless to save its owner. Even if you're a schemer, you're not going to be able to avoid bad stuff. Even if you're the perfect tzaddik, you're not going to be able to avoid the bad things. Verse 9, all these things I observed. I noted all that went on under the sun, while men still have authority over men to treat them unjustly. And here, of course, is a reminder that what politics is all about just means that some guy has the power to mess with me or him or you. And then I saw scoundrels coming from the holy site. In other words, bad people went to the temple and being brought to burial, and I saw them dying and being buried, while such as had acted righteously were forgotten in the city. So in other words, the evil person can get away with murder, and he's going to live his life, and at the end of life there's going to be a long funeral procession and people crying and weeping. And the poor tzaddik, his life is going to be very different, not so different. And here is another frustration. The fact that the sentence imposed for evil deeds is not executed swiftly, which is why men are emboldened to do evil. You say there's justice in the world. Well, I did something wrong. I was waiting for the knock at the door, the police to take me away, and it never happened. So I figured, hey, I did it once, I can get away with it again. The fact that a sinner may do evil 100 times and his punishment still be delayed. He seems to be telling us, Kohelet, that there is a punishment, there is a sense of justice, but it's not according to your timetable. And who knows when it's going to come around. Maybe it's going to be years before all this is going to blow up in your face. In the meantime, you might as well do what you want, get away with what you want. For although I am aware that, quote, it will be well with those who revere God, since they revere him, and it will not be well with the scoundrel, and he will not live long, because he does not revere God, unquote. Here is a frustration that occurs in the world. Sometimes an upright man is requited according to the conduct of the scoundrel. The good guy gets the deal that the bad guy should have gotten. And sometimes the scoundrel is requited according to the conduct of the upright. The opposite is also true, that the bad guy seems to get the reward that should have gone to the good person. And then Kohelet summarizes, I say, all that is frustration. Right? And he says, Amarti shagam zeh havel. Frustration, or again, it's breath, it's here, it's gone. What are we going to make of this? And as we've said before, Judaism doesn't just have one simple or single answer to the ultimate question of religion. Tzaddik v'ralo, the righteous man who has bad things happen, Rasha v'tovlo, the evil man who has good things that happen to him. The traditional, the earliest explanation is that there is reward and punishment. Second paragraph of the Shema, we've said before, if you're good, God will make it rain, the crops will grow, you will have all you need, you'll be wealthy and happy. If you're bad, it won't rain, no crops, you'll starve, that's your punishment. But clearly, that's not the way life works, even though that's what Deuteronomy seems to say to us. Then you have Job, who stands up and says, not fair, not right, this is wrong. And God says, who are you to tell me what's right or wrong? Do you know how the world works? God doesn't give an answer, but he basically says human beings can never figure it out. And then we have other views which say, you know what, sometimes God will give difficult things to people who don't deserve them, maybe to teach them a lesson, to make them stronger, who knows. You'll find that view as well. And now we have Kohelet, who basically throws up his hands and says, I don't get it, I don't understand, doesn't make sense to me, but yes, bad things happen to good people, and I don't know why, and God ain't telling me. Okay, verse 15. And now we're going to come back to his main teaching. I therefore praised enjoyment. Shibachti, from the word shevach, tishbachot, right? Shibachti ani et hasimcha, happiness. That's what I praised. For the only good a man can have under the sun is to eat and drink and enjoy himself. We've seen this before. He's repeating himself. But the idea is eat, drink, and be merry, because, who knows how long we're going to be around. If something comes to you, don't put it off. Enjoy it now. That's it. That much can accompany him in exchange for his wealth through the days of life that God has granted him under the sun. And then in 16, he says, for I have set my mind to learn wisdom and to observe the business that goes on in the world, even to the extent of going without sleep day and night. And this goes back to what we saw in the very first lines of the first chapter, that I put my mind to wisdom, to figuring out this problem. Why is life the way it is? What's the secret to life? What's the meaning to life? And I studied this. I asked around. I observed. I stayed up all night trying to figure, more than one night, trying to figure all of this out. And I have observed all that God brings to pass. Indeed, man cannot guess the events that occur under the sun. For man tries strenuously, but fails to guess them. And even if a sage should think to discover them, he would not be able to guess them. So it's very much similar to this notion of Job, where God says, who are you? What do you know? But the difference between the book of Job and the book of Kohelet is that at least in the book of Job, God answers him. God shows up. God says, I hear what you're saying. I get that you're upset, but I can't give you the answer. That's not for human beings to fathom, to understand, to know. There is an answer. It's only for God to understand. Sorry. But at least God comes down, puts his arm around Job, and says, I hear you. I know how much you're hurting, but this is not something you will ever know. The difference with Kohelet, it's pretty much the same answer. We can't figure out God's ways. Kohelet has already accepted what Job needed to learn. The difference is that the God of Kohelet never comes down, never talks to him, never acknowledges him, never comforts him, never puts his arm around him. There's a powerful, mysterious God in Job. There's a powerful, mysterious God in Kohelet. The difference is that at least the God in Job seems to feel for Job. The God of Kohelet doesn't show any inclination whatsoever to feel for Kohelet or to anybody else. He's up there doing his thing, and that's the end of it. And so that brings us to the end of chapter 8. Let's dive into chapter 9. For all this I noted, and I ascertained all this, that the actions of even the righteous and the wise are determined by God. Do not think for a minute that, that Kohelet is an atheist, or that there is no God in the world who controls things, right? And you might think, doesn't matter whether you're good or bad, rich or poor, same thing happens to everybody. You might come to the conclusion, wait a minute, maybe there is no God. Maybe it's just us, and that's all there is. But Kohelet doesn't buy that. There is a God. And everything that happens because God decides it's going to happen. That's, a key point of who this man is. But in the meantime, there's no understanding God, who, why, where, when. Okay? We continue. Even love, even hate, man knows none of these in advance. None. So everything is determined by God. God doesn't leave anything to us, even who you fall in love with. Maybe that's the origin of, the Yiddish idea of bashert, right? God is the one who picks who is your destined love. And he goes, for the same fate is in store for all, for the righteous, for the wicked, for the good and pure, for the impure, for him who sacrifices, and for him who does not. That's startling. Doesn't matter if you come to shul. Doesn't matter if you obey the mitzvot. God is going to give you this or that, and it's not dependent upon how pious you are or how good you are. Same thing happens to everybody. It's God who decides when. For him who is pleasing and for him who is displeasing. And for him who swears, meaning takes oaths, and for him who shuns oaths. That is the sad thing about all that goes on under the sun. That the same fate is in store for all. Not only that, but men's hearts are full of sadness and their minds of madness while they live. And then to the dead. So while you're alive, you're sad, you're crazed by what happens in life. And then you know what happens? And then you die. For he who is reckoned among the living has something to look forward to. Even a live dog is better than a dead lion. What's he mean by this? We would make a mistake if we assume that when they're talking about a dog, they're talking about dogs as we know them, pets. Back in the day, a dog was a wild animal, something that you didn't domesticate and you didn't want to bring into your house. These were things that were barking at you, biting you, and they were often mangy and they were going through the garbage. That's what a dog was. So he's saying, as difficult as life is, you're sad, you're crazed about it, still, better to be alive than to be dead. And better to be a live dog, meaning a mangy, disgusting animal that goes through the trash and barks at people and bites their legs, than to be the king of beasts who's dead. And again, he's, this is strange. He's telling us, because if you're alive, at least now and then there will be some happiness that comes your way. You might think, why would I want to be alive if all of life is sadness and madness? And the answer is because once you're in the grave, there is no happiness. At least when you're alive, as poor as you might be, there still could be moments of pleasure. And verse 5, since the living know they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more recompense, for even the memory of them has died. Their loves, their hates, their jealousies have long since perished, and they have no more share till the end of time in all that goes on under the sun. And now I want you to look at what's going to happen here. He gets as pessimistic and as gloomy and as dark as he could possibly be, right? There's what awaits us but death. But don't go there too quickly. Better to be a mangy dog going through the garbage, because there might be a bone for you to pick on. Give me a break with all this negativity and this darkness. And yet, look at the very next sentence. We see in verse 7, go, eat your bread in gladness, drink your wine in joy, for your action was long ago approved by God. This is what God wants you to do. And here, once again, the difference between line 6 and line 7 is, to me, it's Kohelet suffering from bipolar disease. Here is a guy who's manic and then depressive, and then it just goes back and forth. And at one moment, things are as dark as they can be. And now, all of a sudden, there's brightness. And he says, you know what's good? If you've got a meal, sit down and enjoy it. Relish it. Have the best wine that you can find. Because this is what God wants for you. Then he continues, verse 8, let your clothes always be freshly washed, and your head never lack ointment. There was no indoor plumbing. There was no soap back then. People, especially those who were manual laborers, they were filthy, they stunk, and their clothes were probably disgusting and dirty and torn and ragged. And that's the way most people walked around. And yet, Kohelet, maybe because he's in the upper class, he tells us, let your clothes always be freshly washed and your head never lack ointment. So every day you should get up, don't stay in your sweatsuits or your pajamas, get up and get dressed and be neat and look good. That's important, because how you look affects not only what other people think about you, it affects how you think about yourself. And he says, and your head never lack ointment. People didn't have Head and Shoulders or Prel back in the day. So the only thing to keep your hair from the filth and the oil was to put ointment, some kind of cream or some oil to combat the filth and the dirt. In other words, look your best every single day. And now in verse 9, he comes to the ultimate. Not only how you what you eat, not only how you dress, but most importantly, verse 9, enjoy happiness with a woman you love. We saw 2 weeks ago, last week, we saw the problem of it's women. They're no damn good, right? And they're the ones that are going to get you in trouble. But now we see a very different Kohelet. Is it at an earlier point in his life before he was disappointed or hurt by a woman? Is it at a later point when he comes to see true love maybe in his life? Enjoy happiness with a woman you love all the fleeting days of your life that you have been granted to you under the sun. all your fleeting days. For that alone is what you can get out of life and out of the means you acquire under the sun. Whatever is in your power to do, do with all your might. This is a magnificent idea that applies in all cases. Right? Whatever you're going to do with all your might. Kol asher timsa yadcha la'asot, whatever your hand will find to do, b'kochacha aseh. Do it with whatever power. Don't go through the motions. Don't just, okay, I checked that one off, let's go to the next one. Whatever you're going to be present, as people would say today, right? Whatever you're doing, be totally involved in and into. For there is no action, no reasoning, no learning, no wisdom in Sheol, where you are going. You better do it now, because once you're dead, you're going to Sheol, and you can do nothing, you can enjoy or experience nothing. Okay, now we come to verse 11, one of the more famous lines, not only of the Bible, but of literature in general, Western literature. I have further observed under the sun that, and here he goes, the race is not won by the swift, nor the battle by the valiant, nor is bread won by the wise, nor wealth by the intelligent, nor favor by the learned. For the time of mischance comes to all. Right? Time and fate intervene. I want to look at the first one. You know, he brings us 5 pieces to this proverb. Race is not won by the swift, the battle by the valiant, the bread by the wise, wealth by the intelligent, favor by the learned. You would think that if you are fast and strong and smart, that all good things will come to you. And he says, And that first one, the race is not won by the swift. In the Hebrew, it says, Ki lo la kalim, kal, meaning either light, but light of foot, quick of foot. Lo la kalim hamerots, the race is not to the swift. So I'm thinking to myself, here's Kohelet in the 3rd century BCE saying the race is not to the swift. And I'm reminded of Aesop's fables. Aesop is the 7th century BCE, so he's several hundred years before Kohelet. It's a good chance that Kohelet might have been familiar with Aesop's fables, for all we know. We don't know, but maybe. So how about this? We've got the hare and the tortoise. A hare was making fun of the tortoise one day for being so slow. "Do you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with the tortoise, but for the fun of the thing he agreed. So the fox, who had consented to act as judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he lay down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and after a time passed the place where the hare was sleeping. But the hare slept on very peacefully, and when at last he did wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. The moral of the story, slow and steady wins the race. Now, I want you to think about these two pieces of wisdom, the Greek and the Jewish. Not so much the Jewish, but a Jewish piece of wisdom. Okay, what is the message of the hare and the tortoise? It's more complicated than the race is not to the swift. It is that it usually is to the swift unless the swift acts stupidly. You know, it's almost like in Jeopardy, where the guy for Final Jeopardy is uncatchable, but he bets everything and ultimately loses. Had he bet small, he would have come back as a returning champion. Similarly, the message is, between a hare and a tortoise, the hare is always going to win, unless the hare is stupid by taking a nap on the side of the road. So the message, the moral of the story, the lesson of the fable is, don't be stupid, right? Don't undercut yourself. Because if you use just your talents and you don't get sidetracked, you're going to win. But, so the only problem is you yourself. Whereas Kohelet seems, he's not telling a story, he's giving a proverb, right? It's a few words. The race is not won by the swift, period. What does he mean by that? It's not that the swift person is going to be stupid and is going to take a nap. Sometimes what's going to happen is he's running and he's going to get hit by a lightning bolt and he's going to die, and the other people are going to pass him on the track. That wasn't his stupidity that did that, or he's going to get hit by a drunk driver who didn't see him or didn't care, right? So it goes a little bit further. To Aesop, it's you're the only thing that can stop you. Whereas Kohelet says there's a whole world of stuff out there that can stop you, and you don't know where and when it's coming from, right? So same idea, but a little bit different. And what we can't really say is that, oh, this is the Greek or Hellenistic philosophy and this is the Jewish. These are two men who are both offering wisdom from their own experience, and it's slightly different, although it seems to be, in the same realm. And similarly, the battle isn't always won by the strongest army, right? History is filled with that, by things that are going to happen. You've got the Russian winter that's going to stop the German army from conquering all of Russia. So stuff is going to happen, and it's beyond your control. You can't even plan for it because you never know. And just because you're smart doesn't mean you're going to be wealthy and have all the things that you want. Bread for the wise, wealth, the intelligent, favor for the learned. Okay? Interestingly, he tells us three things that are all connected with how smart you are isn't really going to matter. Now remember, he is a teacher who is trying to teach wisdom to these upper class young men. And he says, no matter how much you learn, don't think that that's going to be, all you need in life. For time and mischance come to all. Verse 12, and a man cannot even know his time. As fishes are enmeshed in a fatal net, and as birds are trapped in a snare, so men are caught at the time of calamity when it comes upon them without warning. We're no different than the fish who are caught in the net, or the bird in a snare. This thing too I observed under the sun about wisdom, and it affected me profoundly. There was a little city with few men in it, and to it came a great king, meaning who was going to conquer the city, who invested it and built mighty siege works against it. Present in the city was a poor wise man who might have saved it with his wisdom, but nobody thought of that poor man. Had people say, the poor, there might be somebody poor here. Don't discount him just because he's not wealthy. He may be the one with the brains that could save us. But nobody asked him because we rich people assume that only rich people know everything. So I observed, wisdom is better than valor, but a poor man's wisdom is scorned, and his words are not heeded. Words spoken softly by wise men are sooner heeded than those shouted by a lord in folly. Wisdom is more valuable than weapons of war, but a single error destroys much of value. I wanted to share two other little pieces from another book. Remember, it said that present in the city was a poor man who might have saved it, but nobody thought of that poor man. So here's what I want. There are two stories. One is in the book of Judges in chapter 9 and verse 52. We read the following, and it's about Avimelech, who was, most people aren't even aware of him. We're in the period that goes after Joshua, but before King Saul, the period of the judges. And there was one judge whose name was Avimelech, and he thought he was going to make himself the king and conquer everybody. Avimelech proceeded to Tebez. He encamped it. He occupied it. Within the town was a fortified tower, and all the citizens of the tower, men and women, took refuge there. They shut themselves in and went up to the roof of the tower. Avimelech pressed forward to the tower and attacked it. He approached the door of the tower to set it on fire. But a woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and cracked his skull. What's an upper millstone? People had a big flat stone that was stationary. They would throw their wheat on it, and then you'd take the upper millstone, which was much smaller, and you could use it and manipulate it to crush and crack the wheat or whatever else you had. So you took this upper stone, which was portable, but still heavy. So there's a woman up in the tower. She sees Abimelech is going to burn them out. What does she do? She drops this heavy stone, hits him on the head, and cracks his skull. He immediately cried out to his attendant, his arms bearer, "Draw your dagger, finish me off, that they may not say of me, 'A woman killed him.'" So his attendant stabbed him, and he died. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone went home. So again, who was the heroine here? Some anonymous woman. We don't even know her name. She saved the city. Right? Now, this was in the book of Judges. No doubt Kohelet knew that story. And without reference to that story specifically, he seems to tell the similar idea that there's somebody who could figure out a way to save the city. Either nobody asked them, or if they did save the city, nobody heralded them. Nobody gave them a medal. Isn't that the way that life often works? So Kohelet seems to be referencing this very same story. But there's another reference as well. This is from the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 20. And we see the following. King Joab is going against his enemies, and we read the following. The enemy was a man named Sheva ben Bichri. Sheva had passed through all the tribes of Israel up to Abel, the city of Beit Ma'achah, and all the Be'erites assembled and followed him inside. Yoav's men came and besieged him in Abel of Beit Ma'achah, and threw up a siege mound against the city, and it stood against the rampart. All the troops with Yoav were engaged in battering the wall, when a clever woman shouted from the city, "Listen, listen, tell Yoav to come over here so I can talk to him." So he approached her, and the woman said, "Are you Yoav? Are you the general of the army that's trying to get our town?" "Yes," he answered. And she said to him, "Listen to what your handmaid has to say." "I'm listening," he replied. And she continued, "In olden times, people used to say, 'Let them inquire of Ava.' And that was the end of the matter." In other words, this was a pretty smart town in the olden days. "I am one of those who seek the welfare of the faithful in Israel. But you seek to bring death upon a mother city in Israel. Why should you destroy the Lord's possession?" Yoav replied to the woman, far be it from me to destroy or to ruin, not at all. But a certain man from the hill country of Ephraim, his name is Sheva ben Bichri. He has rebelled against King David. Just hand him over alone to us, and I will withdraw from the city and not destroy it. The woman assured Yoav, "His head shall be thrown over the wall to you." The woman came to all of the people with her clever plan. They cut off the head of Sheva, son of Bichri, and threw it to Yoav. He then sounded the shofar. All the men dispersed to their homes, and Yoav returned to the king in Jerusalem. So again, another story about an anonymous woman who was able to save a woman. In those days, first of all, person doesn't even have a name. Number two, she's a woman. And in those days, the assumption was women are weak. Here we are against the general of the king and an entire army. Who saves the city? It's this anonymous old woman who came up with a brilliant idea. Okay, we'll tell her story. What was her name? Forgotten. Nobody knows, right? But so Kohelet is referencing both of these stories, one from the book of Shmuel, one from the book of Shoftim, which certainly he knew about, and without quoting the stories, he references them and reminds us sometimes the answer to things that you'd never imagine. You know, the battle is not to the mighty Yoav or mighty Avimelech and their armies. That one small little old lady, either who comes up with the plan or with the millstone, is able to turn back an entire army. But because she's a woman, we didn't ask her, and after she saved us, we didn't herald her. So a couple of interesting references to Aesop's fable, to the other books in the Bible. Next week we'll pick up with chapter 10.